Okay. I call to order the Albany City Council meeting of Monday, October 7th, 2019. And Michael Hurley will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Some people use under God and some people don't, so we get a little bit off rhythm there sometimes. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Barnes.
Present, and I would like to add that I need to leave early tonight, but I'm not going away mad, I'm just going away.
Councilmember Moss.
Present.
Councilmember Pilch.
Here.
Vice Mayor McQuaid. Here. Mayor Nason.
Here. We begin with a ceremonial matter, a proclamation of Fire Prevention Week, and Councilmember Barnes will read this proclamation.
We have Captain James Berry here to accept the proclamation.
City of Albany Proclamation in recognition of Fire Prevention Week 2019. Whereas the City of Albany is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all living and visiting in Albany. Whereas fire is a serious public safety concern both locally and nationally, and homes are the locations where people are at the greatest risk of fire. And whereas home fires killed 2,630 people in the United States in 2017, according to the National Fire Protection Association, and fire departments in the United States responded to 357,000 home fires. And whereas the majority of U.S. fire deaths, 4 out of 5, occur at home each year, and whereas the fire death rate per 1,000 home fires reported in U.S. fire departments was 4% higher in 2017 than it was 37 years before in 1980. And whereas when smoke alarms sound, occupants may have less than 2 minutes to escape to safety. And whereas home fire escape drills should be practiced at least twice a year during the day and night, and children should be taught to escape on their own in the event of a fire in case adults can't help them. And whereas it is always important to get out and stay out, never going back inside the home for people, pets, or things during a fire. And whereas the 2019 Fire Prevention Week theme, not every hero wears a cape, plan and practice your escape, that rhymes, effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our safety from fire. Now, therefore, the Albany City Council does hereby proclaim October 6 through 12, 2019 as Fire Prevention Week throughout the City of Albany, and urges all people of Albany to take the time to practice home fire escape drills, be aware of the surroundings and exits in the event of fire or other emergency, and respond when smoke alarm sounds by exiting the building immediately. Signed, Rochelle Nason, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Please, thank you. Mayor Nason and Council, thanks for this opportunity to come up here and have this proclamation brought to the community and for the fire department. A few other things. Fire Prevention Week, the inception came about in 1925 when we had President Calvin Coolidge first declare that it was Fire Prevention Week. Since then, we hit a peak of fire life of loss in 1977. We've gradually declined to that to a reported 50% less fires and also loss of life in 2019. But much more help is still needed. We are nationally, 3 out of every 5 loss of life fires are reported in homes without smoke detectors. And so we need to continue the push to continue to get smoke detectors in homes. And you've heard in the proclamation, this year's theme is practice a safe way out of your home. That's the most important word right there, is make sure you can plan a way out of your home, but make sure you practice as well. One thing we do like to celebrate the end of Fire Prevention Week with is our pancake breakfast, which is on Saturday, this coming up Saturday, October 12th. We celebrate, educate, and train from 8 in the morning till noon. It's here at the firehouse. We'd love to see everybody in the community here and everybody on the council join us. And again, I just want to thank you for the time and for the proclamation today. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Hope to see everyone at that at the pancake breakfast. It's wonderful. It's one of the great things. Living in Albany, knowing that we have a terrific fire department, it's one of the wonderful things about this town.
Captain Barry, I'd like to congratulate you on your promotion to captain.
Yes, yes. Now I'd like to call up Eva Phelan.
I brought some props.
And Eva is going to talk to us about Albany Local Week.
Mayor Nason and council, I'm Eva Phelan, and I'm the Senior Recreation Supervisor. Get all my ducks in a row here for the Recreation Department. And I have the honor to be here tonight to tell you a little bit about Albany Local Week. We wrapped it up. It's always the last week of September. And at the end, we'll award the Uber Albany Cup to the people who won the competition and got the most points. So Albany Local Week, Albany Recreation and Community Services started it in 2012 as a way to promote businesses and encourage residents to discover and celebrate all the amazing things that Albany has to offer. And every year, businesses have the opportunity to provide specials or promotions, discounts to their businesses so that residents then shop, play, eat, and stay local. This year we hosted and helped out with more than a dozen different events in the 8 days. So it was September 20th to 28th. And the events included our Bike About Town, one of the biggest ones we've had so far. We had a clothing swap. We had the Crazy Marin Monster that is a 10K race where they run all the way to the top of Marin and then zigzag their way back. We had the Senior Center had their World's Fair and open house with over 375 attendees. We had our garden swap, our music in the park. The Arts Committee hosted a haiku workshop, and the Chamber hosted the Best of the Albany Awards and event. We had our Food Truck Friday, I'm almost done. Friends of Albany Park Cleanup Day at Terrace Park, and then As You Wish hosted their movie night too, which was over 100 people at that event as well. So the Albany Recreation Department adds a little bit of fun to the week, and we challenge residents. You guys have seen this scorecard before. It's an Albany activity guide, and we challenge residents to do as much as they can in Albany for 1 week. And at the end of the week, we love to award the Uber Albany Cup, which you can see the legacy is on here. 2012, the first winner is Vice Mayor Peggy McQuaid. She's on here. And it goes every year, it's listed here. And this year we did something a little bit different. We had 2 winners. Normally we've only had 1. So this year we have a youth winner and then an adult winner. So I'd love to announce and have the winners come up here, and maybe we'll take a picture and I'll give you guys a little prize. I should mention that everyone who turned in their scorecard got an Albany prize. And this year we had our graphic design staff member design these very, very cool Albany local Turkey Abbey Road stickers. So I'm going to pass these out to you guys. I think there's plenty for all of you. And so everyone who turned in a scorecard won a prize. So, but again, let me mention the winners here. So our adult winner was Lindsay Burbage. So if you would come on up with 9,290 points. Where would we put you? We need a new, there it is. There it is, 2019. So maybe we'll will have Liam, do you have your photo or your camera? Take a picture. But Lindsay attended events, went shopping, did good neighbor things, and they got extra points for adding things up in the same day. And again, congratulations. This is a big honor. Okay, so I guess we'll take a picture of the two of us. Okay. And then if you'll stick around, we'll do one at the end here too.
Great.
Okay. And then our youth winner for the year 2019 is Ulysses McIntyre. Ulysses, if you'll come up here, come on up and get your award. Ulysses. Ulysses, how old are you? Are you 5 yet? You're 4. Ulysses is only 4 years, so you are officially the youngest winner we've ever had. So here is your prize. That's for you. And there might be another T-shirt in there. And then, do you want to take a picture? You turn around. Yeah, you want to be in the picture? Come in the picture. Mary too. You want to hold this? We'll do one outside too. Well, let's go up here. We'll do it in the front
Bring
here.
everybody up.
And I wanted to give Lindsay. And then we have official signed by Mayor Nason awards that you can frame and put on your wall. That's for you. Yes, of course, of course.
Just one really quick thing. I want to thank the Albany Community Center, of course, and June, my wife, who makes all of this possible. And before we leave, I just want to say directly to the Vice Mayor, Peggy McQuaid, there is a new sheriff in town. And his name is McIntyre, Ulysses McIntyre.
As long as the Irish keep it, it's okay.
All right, let's go up front here and we'll take a photo. We need the cup.
Let Ulysses know he can either have the cool bag or he can join the city council.
I won't be on the council forever.
Come up here. Do you mind? We'll stand in front of you. Okay.
And I'd like to call Brennan Brown to the podium. And Brennan will be talking about our audiovisual apprentices and awarding certificates.
Thank you. Good evening, city staff and council members. Thank you so much, Mayor Nason. Thank you for having me. I'm Brennan Brown from the Recreation and Community Services Department, and I'm here to recognize the Audiovisual Apprentice Program that took place between May through September. September is Recreation and KALB's busiest time with music in the park every Wednesday, as well as Albany Local Week, where this year we put on events like Food Truck Friday, As You Wish Block Movie Night, and I'll let Eva previously explain the rest. So basically, as these events continue to grow and evolve every year, the help we need becomes much greater and needs to be much more dynamic. So we kind of ask the same thing from our audiovisual apprentices. This is our 6th year having the AV Apprentice Program, which teaches film, photography, and audio at live events while providing real work experience in these fields. They learn what goes into the planning, preparation, and presentation of large-scale events, as well as what goes into the events what goes into breaking down the events at the end of the night. From this program, former AV apprentices have gone on to be accepted into youth programs at Berkeley Rep and Northwestern University, as well as they've gotten into good colleges and gotten jobs within the city of Albany itself. This year's group, Andrew, Ben, Julian, Nathan, and Seamus, I'm sure, will follow suit. Their ability to grasp complex audiovisual concepts, their self-reliance, and their commitment to the Albany community were apparent every day of the program. They showcased these abilities while balancing extracurriculars and high school, which I really believe is the most challenging and demanding it's ever been. They have incredible professionalism, talent, focus, problem-solving ability, and passion for their work. They demonstrated these traits while also having a lot of fun in the process. So today, we'd like to recognize everything that they've accomplished in this program. So I'd like to have Ben, Julian, Seamus, Andrew, and Nathan come up. Looks like Andrew couldn't be here today, but I want to recognize Andrew came in as well. So, I'd like to photo opportunity.
Guys, come towards us. It's easier to get everybody in the picture.
One more.
Turkeys. How did you do all that work? I just want to thank you one more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Really inspiring. Okay. So, back to work. Report on action taken in closed session. We met on performance review and compensation for an employee, and staff was given direction. The consent calendar. The consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Do council members have any items to pull from the consent calendar?
510.
510. Anything else? Okay, how about audience members? Do any audience members have anything they'd like pulled from the consent calendar? Okay, then let's go ahead with
512.
512. Okay. Why don't we go ahead with 510?
Okay, I just have a suggestion, I think. First of all, thank you for being our voting delegate on next week at the conference. I'm wondering if we want to give you a little bit more flexibility on Resolution 2. It states voting yes if the league staff's suggested language change is approved. But I'm wondering if there happens to be other language which you feel is appropriate that may not come from league staff, if we want to make it a little bit more flexible for you.
Well, so we all are voting representatives of a number of bodies, and it's more of, this is more of my recommendation and my intention, giving my recommendation and telling you my intention at the league. I do intend to be flexible in voting as things come up. So I didn't think it was necessary to put that in the formal language, since this was just it's more about seeing whether the council is totally out of sync with these recommendations or not. So if you're mostly in sync, then I feel like I already have the latitude to use my best judgment, if that's okay.
I think it's fine. It just says, it calls out the league staff's language, and that's why I'm wondering if we want to take that piece out.
Oh,
I'm trying to give you more
well, so
flexibility, not less.
yeah, well, I felt like that the staff's addition there was important to call out that they had improved upon the resolution. And if there's further improvements, that's fine. But I think there would be a robust discussion if the staff's recommendation were not included in the resolution, then I would use my best judgment on my vote then.
And you're representing us with your best judgment, so I think we're good. Are you okay with that? Okay. And let's go to 512. Councilmember Pilch.
Oh, yeah, this is just the one item that I neglected to send email to staff ahead of time about, and I just have one question, which is there a red line version of what changed? And if not, can I get the previous version so that I can compare? I'm sure the changes are fine, but not having the red line version, I could not compare exactly what had changed.
Sure, we can get you something showing the differences.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're ready for a motion on the consent calendar.
I'll move consent.
Second.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Pilch?
Yes.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yes.
Mayor Nason?
Yes.
And the motion carried.
Thank you. Okay, good of the city. This portion of the agenda is for persons desiring to address the city council on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note that city policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. All persons wishing to speak on an item are requested to fill out speaker cards and provide them to the city clerk. The Brown Act limits the council's ability to take or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or else to a future agenda. Do we have speaker cards?
Yes.
Mr. Beal.
Hi, I'm Brian Beal. I'm Vice President of the Albany Democratic Club. We'll be having our monthly meeting at the Stone Room at the Community Center the third Thursday, which this month is the 17th. This month we'll be having a postcard campaign to help in Virginia, and we'll be having a presentation on a very popular topic in Albany, ranked choice voting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have other cards? Yes. Mr. Larson.
William Larson, Albany residents. I sent an email to the council describing what I thought was yet another parking issue associated with Keynes and Adams. Just quickly, the vehicle code prohibits U-turns within the block in a business district, and it defines a business district rather broadly as including multifamily housing apartments. And so I believe a number probably of blocks within Keynes and Adams would be classified as business districts, and U-turns which are now required under our, I believe, correct interpretation of left side parking would be impossible. In response to my email, Mayor Nason sent me an email in which she cites an appellate court's decision, People v. McGuire, which I was unaware of, in which the appellate court determined that if you made that U-turn, and a U-turn is a three-point turn, there was some confusion. U-turn includes a three-point turn. If you made that turn with the assistance of a driveway, then that section of the vehicle code didn't apply. So maybe that's correct. I believe that's correct, but in my email I suggested that it's a good idea to understand for staff and the community and the council to understand the laws and how they impact a project. In fact, I sent this question to the city attorney in January, and I kind of forgot about it. It wasn't ever addressed. So I think it's appropriate for the city attorney to weigh in and do two things: determine what's the correct interpretation of the law with regard to those streets, and maybe also inform our Albany's finest that this is the way the law reads and they shouldn't be giving tickets. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Anyone in the audience still wish to speak? Okay, then we will move on to council subcommittee reports. Council member reports on appointed representation of Albany and other meetings and events. And we start with city council subcommittees. Mr. Councilmember Pilch and I are the San Pablo Avenue Corridor Project subcommittee, and we have discussed this. There is in the packet a copy of the letter from the Department of Rehabilitation explaining the perspective of the Department of Rehabilitation on the possibility of the off San Pablo Keynes-Adams bikeway alternative. I also wanted to report that I attended a meeting at the Alameda County Transportation Commission on the San Pablo corridor outreach. This is the plan to improve both bus and bicycle transportation in the San Pablo Avenue corridor, of which the Keynes-Adams bikeway is a potential, has a potential linkage. And I think it was interesting that there was very strong support, to me, surprisingly strong support within the corridor for both bus rapid transit and for bike routes on San Pablo, even at the cost of substantial parking, although there was not strong support for that in Albany itself. So we will see as that outreach information becomes more available, and hopefully we will continue to gather information as we go along. Councilmember Pilch, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Okay, good. And we go to City Council appointed representation of Albany. Has anyone been to any meetings on behalf of Albany that they would like to report on? Yes.
Sure. So we had an EBC board meeting. The EBC continues to grow staff and has moved into new offices in Oakland at Harrison and 19th, maybe. But it's near the lake. Nice offices, which I visited recently. EBC reports that they exceeded the goals for clean energy for 2018, which was great news. And that Tracy and Pleasanton are two communities interested in joining EBCE. And Tracy being out of Alameda County, but still interested in joining. Newark is also interested, but they might have missed the deadline to file the proper paperwork to actually get on in this cycle. They might have to wait another year before they can start their process. But if Newark and Pleasanton come, I think we only have one city, and those might be all the cities actually who did not, the two cities. No, I think there's one who still has not joined. Alameda doesn't count because it has its own power. Anyway, so that was good news. We talked about direct access a little bit, which is the ability for companies to get their power directly from a provider rather than going through PG&E or EBCE. And more direct access has been allowed by the CPUC, which is a little bit of a threat to other organizations, to EBCE. Not a threat, but it's a concern. And we talked about allowing the staff to have some leeway with pricing agreements so that we could deal with those situations. And we signed a couple new projects for power generation, for clean power generation. I also, EBC also now has subcommittees. I attended the Marketing and Legislative Subcommittee. PG&E is hiking their rates again, and therefore there will be a corresponding rate hike from EBC. The only legislative item that was of serious concern to EBC was SB 520, but that did end up, which we wanted to veto, but SB 520 ended up getting signed by the governor. Hopefully that's going to be okay. And there's a change, and if anyone has is on the EVA rate, it's changing. Via PG&E, it's changing to an EV2A rate with different times of the day. And as far as elected representation, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any others? Okay, for myself, in addition to the briefing on the San Pablo Avenue corridor planning, I attended both the board and committee meetings of the Alameda County Transportation Commission. The most important thing I think that is happening of greatest interest to Albany is the work to select the next executive director for the commission, which will be an important hire really for the entire county. We'll talk a little bit in the next item about the Faster Bay Area project. I also attended the Stop Waste Board and committee meetings. This is the agency that wrestles with recycling, energy use, and other waste issues, which, as you can imagine, is continuing to struggle with the issues that we have heard about with the China's decision not to continue to accept the recycling, all of the recyclables that it has in the past, and the efforts that are underway to backfill for that. We had a presentation about stop waste in the schools, including the Albany schools. It is surprising how much waste, the environmental impact of food waste, as well as of unrecyclable plastics. And so there was an interesting presentation on the work that they are doing at the school level to address that problem. And that's all for me. So I think we can move on to city council, other city council meetings and events. Mr. Pilch, Councilmember Pilch?
Sure. I think four of us were at the Census Town Hall, hosted by our supervisor, Keith Carson, thank you. And I was at Food Truck Friday, delicious. I was at the presentation for the potential ballot measure, Faster Bay Area, and I think three of us were there as well. And also attended something called the Rose Foundation Film Fest. Rose Foundation is call themselves environmental organizations for a community in the environment, and that was a very interesting event as well. I think that's it.
Thank you. Vice Mayor McQuaid.
I also attended Keith Carson's Census Subcommittee, of which I'm a member. The pop-up parklet in front of Mr. Dewey's. Tri-City Safety Day with Albany, El Cerrito, and Richmond. Councilmember Pilch mentioned the Census Town Hall here. I went to the Senior Center Open House. You know, even though I can't participate formally in Local Week, I did manage to get to a few events. Takes that. League of California Cities East Bay Division meeting. I stopped in at Best of Albany. I went to there was a CERT presentation on power outages. Attended a United Against Hate meeting, the chamber mixer. I presented United Against Hate to the Contra Costa County Mayor's Conference. On Saturday, the Red Cross presented a shelter training here. Mayor Nason and I attended a barbecue yesterday in celebration of 50 years of the Berkeley Food Pantry, and I also made it to Food Truck Friday. We've put up on the screen there Community Emergency Preparedness Fair, which is put on by the city of Berkeley. But we all work together in these things. So on Saturday, after you get your fill of pancakes at the Albany Fire Department, please come by James Kenney Park, which is 8th near Virginia, between 10 and 1. The city of Berkeley will be hosting their disaster fair with a lot of information and materials and just a lot of good things to take home with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barnes, anything to add? Councilmember Moss?
Well, as mentioned, I was at the Census Town Hall that Supervisor Keith Carson sponsored. The FASTER meeting, which was essentially a preliminary presentation on a potential tax to improve transportation in the Bay Area. And they were looking for feedback from politicians and others in the community as to whether that should go forward. And I guess I think it would have been in an earlier part of the meeting, but Peggy and I were at a youth subcommittee meeting.
And I think we'll report more formally in a couple of meetings, probably.
Yeah, okay, all right. So there's not much to report on that at this point, but.
Okay, thank you so much. I went to many, not all, but I'd say most of the things mentioned. I did want to say this about FASTER Bay Area. There was, in terms of the elected official feedback, there was a good deal of concern among East Bay elected officials about the proposal. So I think we can all expect to see a tax measure come forward to improve transportation, but it may have a good ways to go as it develops from a policy perspective. A couple of things I did that were not mentioned were the Friends of Terrace Park cleanup I attended, and the Walk and Roll to School Day. We had a Safe Routes to School event, and I passed out pencils to young people who had found active ways to get to school. So may we have a city manager report, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I told our executive team that last meeting I didn't have much and it was disappointing. So this week I have too much. So I'll try and go as quickly as I can here, but it is all really important information to share. Our police department on the 21st attended the Tri-City Safety Day at El Cerrito Plaza. It's a great event. Having police and firefighters available to talk with folks and just get to know disaster preparedness and public safety a little bit better. We also had a shelter training, how to open a shelter, basically. Volunteers here preparing for the event of a disaster and what it takes to open a shelter. It's quite a bit of work, so I appreciate all the energy that went into that. As some of you may have received information today, either from media sources or directly from the City of Albany through our e-notify and or our Facebook page, there's the potential this week for a power shutoff by PG&E. We're still working with PG&E through our fire chief and fire department to determine the magnitude and the direct effect, if any, on Albany. So please stay posted to our city website for more information. Of course, probably the first and foremost place to go is the PG&E's website. They have information that they indicate they update regularly as the situations change. It really depends on the weather patterns and a number of other considerations that they have on their end. We are also partnering with Stop Waste to hold a household hazardous waste drop-off this event. Get rid of your old paint and all those strange things you may have in your garage. You do need to register on the stopwaste.org website, and the event is free. It's this Sunday, October 13th at Golden Gate Fields. The Air District has a great program, Clean Cars for All. It provides incentives to trade in older vehicles, retire those vehicles, and perhaps obtain a hybrid or electric or other cleaner burning engine. You can find out more information on the Air District's website. We now have we've reinstated the podiatry services at the senior center. They are available by Dr. Eric Fuller. He offers the service on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of each month at the senior center annex. We've had 20 participants thus far, so it's been really well received. The Albany Community Center Foyer Art Gallery reception will be on October 13th from 4 to 6 at our community center. And Public Works, busy as usual. Albany Hill Improvement Project has kicked off. We removed some trees this past weekend without any issues. Yay. And that was in awareness of the monarch butterfly habitat. That work is expected to occur over the next several months. It includes a new ADA pathway, and we anticipate it to be completed by mid-December. The sewer work continues, ongoing. We've had great success with Ranger Pipeline, our contractor, who, again, did a sewer project on Solano Avenue with very minimal complaints, which is a major accomplishment. And I'd like to recognize our staff for working so well with all those businesses. Washington Avenue traffic calming is also underway with Washington Avenue between Cerrito and Pierce Street. Speed humps were installed last week, and the signage and striping will be installed by the end of next week. East Bay Mud water line replacement is starting in November. They'll be replacing the water line on Adams between Buchanan and Solano. This will certainly impact traffic, and we'll try and keep the community as updated as we can. You may have also seen some signs out. East Bay Mud is doing smoke testing of some of their lines. This will continue for a period of time. It's a non-toxic smoke that they blow through the system. And our Public Works Department, beginning in October, will start for winter preparations. Certainly doesn't feel like it today, but winter will be here eventually. And in advance of the rainy season, it's really our focus time to clear out those storm drains and catch basins to help prevent flooding. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, apologies, but I was just looking up the Stop Waste collection event, and Nicole, where did you say that was going to happen? Golden Gate Fields, okay. I don't think they mention it on their website somehow.
Special website. I'll pull it up and announce it.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we're ready for a presentation on, well, it isn't on an update, it is a presentation updating us on the status, is that correct, of the CIP?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Nation. Thank you, council members. So the intent of this presentation is to provide a snapshot, essentially, of the capital improvement programs that we've been endeavoring for the last 2.5 years. So what we've accomplished, we've got some photos to kind of brag and show some of the highlights of what we've done, where we are with projects that are underway, and then projects yet to come. So the first ones, there's a list of our completed projects. We've got 9 projects shown here. There's a few others that are smaller that didn't make the highlight reel, but 8 completed projects. And let me just show you some of the highlights we have for you. So sidewalk rehab is one of our bigger initiatives since, I believe, 2016, when voters passed into a funding source for $200,000. We've spent roughly about $500,000 to date on sidewalk improvements throughout the city. That's 121 different locations. There was a great deal of effort. Razu Engen is not here today, and he recently got a promotion out of that position, but for 2 years, he really invested a lot of time laying the groundwork for this program. So not only is it just getting a contractor out there to perform the work, we spent a lot of time with traffic and safety, establishing criteria, figuring out a game plan for like a 5 and 10 year time period of priority sidewalk improvements to make, primarily in the pedestrian network, but there's a number of factors, including offset, including location, including how many pedestrians use it. So all of those were put into place after substantial work with traffic and safety. We brought on a really good contractor, Villalobos and Associates, has been out on the street. You guys have seen them, everybody has seen them. They do a great job. They're very courteous, they're very professional. We've been really pleased with them. They've gone through 2 phases that amount to this work in front of you, this $500,000. So just some examples of their work. 1151 Portland, we've got some, on the before picture, we've got some offsets that are clearly visible around the trees. Maybe 80% of the work was tree related, so we had to open up some of these. You can see that the new pavement has a tree well, so it gives a little bit more room for the roots to breathe. And they just did a nice job of getting in and out of there, performing their work, taking care of the trees, working with our arborist, and then getting out and having it complete. Here's one more example. Again, a tree off to the side of this sidewalk, and again, offset, where you've got a 1 or a 2 inch offset that can be a tripping hazard, taken care of, done. This type of work probably takes them in the manner of 3 to 4 days. They generally, they do their best to make sure that the homeowner is aware. Sometimes the homeowner has some requests. They're very accommodating. Parts of the time, if we're touching a homeowner's driveway, the homeowner will come out and ask them to expand the scope, so we have to work with the homeowner to balance the city's interest, and also Villalobos was interested in maybe getting a few other crew members out there to perform additional work that our residents are paying for. I'm going to talk a little bit about sewers. We'll talk about the larger sewer program in the next slide, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the hidden work that you don't see. This is a backyard sewer. So City of Albany, like other cities in the East Bay, have a number of backyard sewers that are put in around fence lines. So it may have been that it was put in before a second property was developed, so it might have been an open field at one point. But regardless, when you're replacing it, you've got what you have in front of you, which is a very congested work site. So this is a small footage, but it's also a very challenging location. So you've got on one side, you have a new building going up for a single family resident, and then on the other side, you've got what amounts to kind of an outbuilding that may either be a storage location or part of a driveway. We found out about this, it went through the community development process. They put in a permit because they wanted to build a structure on this property. It's on Posen. It was undeveloped for quite a while. We knew that the line was there, so we brought out a contractor and kind of hurried up to get in front of the developer to get this replaced. There was a brick manhole that we had to abandon on this property. This goes from the back of their property onto Posen. It impacts about 3 or 4 different properties. But this is an example of work that isn't always noticed, but it's done, and it's rigorous, and it's challenging. The other stuff that you do notice is the stuff that we talked about before. The city manager mentioned the work on Solano. So this is something that we did with Ranger Pipeline during their first contract change order. They had been performing work around the city doing pipe bursting in 2017. They had been performing the work to our satisfaction. We entered into a negotiation for them to work on the change order, and they promised that they would get completion on Solano in 30 days. So we said, okay, that's a good deal. We're going to go ahead and proceed with that. So they got at that point they were working 2 crews, and they just brought both of their crews together into essentially a super crew, and worked on, I believe, 6 blocks of Solano in about 30 days. Let me just double check that. So this was from Curtis down to Pomona. So that's all done. All told, including Solano and including all the work that Ranger has done, they've done about I think about 2 miles of pipeline replacement between the two contract change orders. And we just awarded the first contract change order and the original contract. And in another item, we just awarded them a smaller change order number 2 for work that they will continue for pipe bursting into the beginning of next year. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have a typical excavation. And I would just note that Solano, because it is a truck route, has about 6 inches of concrete underneath its pavement, and that's not typical of Solano. That's not typical of Albany. Albany typically has an AC cover without any concrete on the bottom. This was additional work that they promised and delivered in the 30-day time frame. So let's talk a little bit about street maintenance and sealing. In 2018, we did a slurry seal contract, which is essentially a street maintenance effort. So it's not really a rehabilitation. These are taking streets that are in fair to good condition and putting a seal on top of it so it can be maintained for another 2 to 5 years. Our contract was essentially for about 8 lane miles of slurry seal. That included pothole repairs prior to sealing. On the left picture here, I do want to point out that this is in the midst of them putting down a slurry seal, and on the left side of this photograph is what we call crack seals. So the crack seals are an important preparation piece before you put down an entire slurry seal, and that's to put a little bit of material in between a crack that's beginning so that you seal it up, it doesn't get any more moisture in it, and then you can put a seal curb to curb, and it looks very nice. The preparation work with the seal cracks is something that isn't seen. If you drive down the freeway on 880 like I do, you see it. But for the most part, we don't like that on city streets, so we put a seal on top of it after we do the crack seals. So again, 8 lane miles. The contractor did most all of their work in June and July of this year. It tapered off a little bit into August, and they are the same contractor that is going to be finishing up the Washington Avenue traffic calming efforts that are going on the Hill. So they're going to be finishing that up as well. I will mention that during July, at the high point of construction, we had East Bay Mud working on a couple different streets. We had the slurry seal contractor performing work on, I think, probably about 15 different street segments. We had our sewer contractor along Solano. We had our sidewalk contractor performing work, and PG&E kind of snuck in there and did some work on Curtis at the last minute, which was emergency work, so we didn't stop them, but we would have preferred that they hold off about a month or two. But all of that was essentially the high point of construction, so I applaud the citizens, the residents, for putting up with all of that. This is an example of a project. I came on board and this project was already underway, so this was done by other city staff. I didn't have anything to do with it, except I remarked on it because it's another one of those projects that you don't see unless you happen to be right there at the community center when it was being installed. So all of the HVA equipment in the community center got pulled out and got reinstalled with these nice cranes that came into the parking lot and probably took over for the better part of 2 days. It cost the city about $400,000, so you don't really know about it until you notice that the AC is working better. And then you forget about it because everyone just takes that stuff for granted. But for the moment, we can at least acknowledge that the project was done. It was something that we invested into the building. It was needed, and we got it done very nicely. So again, it's something that we appreciate the contractor delivering on that in a timely manner.
The community center is going to be one of our emergency cooling centers, is that right? So now we can guarantee that people can go to the cooling centers late in the evenings and it will be cool.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, though? On the attachment on table 2 attachment where it talks about design projects, it says Civic Center, never mind, I got it.
It's okay. So this is our 5-year budget against actuals. So in 2017, council approved a 5-year CIP program from fiscal year 2018 out to fiscal year 22. So we've laid that out. So this is a cumulative spending across the years. So the last bar there at the end shows $40 million in cumulative spending approved by council as a plan. So council, when we took this action, we requested specifically that council approve the first 2 years of the budget and then the entire CIP as a planning exercise. So that's how we move forward. We're a little bit behind. Part of that reason is because we had a large backlog of smaller projects that they still take a lot of effort to get off the ground. They still take a lot of effort to deliver, but they're not always large dollar amounts. So the HVAC is a good example. It benefited one very important part of the community, but it wasn't a $2 million project. It was a $400,000 project. Oh, I wasn't sure if you were going to add anything in there. So that's one example of some other projects might be Peggy Thompson Park, which was a good example of a very nice project. I think that came in somewhere in the $1 to $2 million range. So cumulatively, we've spent on the order of about $15.3 million. A large part of that is sewer rehabilitation. A large part of that is street rehabilitation. We're going to be spending more and more in that arena as well in the coming years. Some of the other ones that I didn't mention before, Evelyn Avenue was a kind of a one-off project. SB1 funding was just coming up. For the first year, it was just being delivered, and they required cities, not just us, but cities around the state, to identify a project to get kind of the project off the ground. So we found one block of Evelyn that had not been repaved, and we got a contractor to step in there and deliver that project that relatively matched our SB1 funding limit. Ohlone Greenway and Masonic Sidewalk, another example of a really nice project that small dollar amount, but a lot of impact for the community, a lot of benefit. And the senior center renovations, where we redid the kitchen and we redid a kitchenette with some flooring and some new cabinets. So let's talk a little bit about work we're doing now and then work we're planning into the future. You guys can read this, but we've got a paving project, another paving project, a park project, a sewer project, street lighting, so that's a traffic safety, pedestrian safety project, another pedestrian safety project at Masonic Marin, another park project at Peggy Thompson, and a active transportation project kind of laid out as examples of projects that we're moving forward on now. And so let's talk about each of those. The first paving project is Washington Avenue Reconstruction. So as compared to the 2018 work where it was maintenance of good roads, this is rehabilitation of a road that is in poor condition. So in terms of a pavement condition index, on a scale of 0 to 100, this is in the 40 range, 40 to 50. It's beyond a point where you can really maintain it. It needs to be reconstructed. So we're going to dig out the first 8 to 12 inches of asphalt. We're going to pull it all out, and then we're going to rebuild the whole thing. So a project like this takes a matter of months, not weeks, and it's going to cost somewhere in the $1.5 to $2 million range when you include design, construction, inspection, material testing, all of those things put together. It's going to be a substantial effort. So we've gotten to a point where we're at about a 60% design effort on this, and we identified 22 curb ramps that need our attention. So we've worked out most of the paving elements from curb to curb, and we're really spending our time now making sure that the curb ramp elements of this project are ADA compliant. So that's where we are now with this project, and we're hoping to get through that portion of the project in the next few months. Some of the work that included that I'll add that it was included in this, was having to do site surveys to make sure we have elevations correct for the curb ramps. And then also we want to look at opportunities to put in bulb outs. For example, on Masonic, where we have slightly higher traffic speeds, we can put in a bulb out and shorten that distance for pedestrians. So those are the things that we're looking at for this project. This diagram was the illustration I'm showing you here was done at about 10%, and it shows the work from San Pablo up to Key Route. So we pushed that eastern boundary further out to the east to capture Pomona. So if you're driving down that area, that last block really deserves our attention as well. So we pushed the scope from Key Route eastward another block. While we were working on, and while we continue to work on the Washington Avenue Rehabilitation project, we also spent a good amount of effort planning our next several years of street improvements. So we worked closely with traffic and safety. Probably over the last 2 years, we went back and forth with them about 3 times, establishing street classifications for the entire city to make sure we have an idea of whether they're local streets or arteries or collectors. We made an effort to distinguish bike routes separate from other street types, because we want to treat those differently. But the goal here with this program is to find a model using Street Saver, using the program that MTC provides us for free or for a small cost. I don't say free in front of my boss. The price is included in our membership to MTC. So the work there is to really run a lot of models that establish criteria, including PCI, across categories like I just mentioned, local streets, arterials, and collectors. We want those categories to rise up together. So where we have streets in the 50s and 60s now, we may have collectors on one end of the scale and local streets on another end of the scale. All of those need to rise up together so everybody benefits hopefully equally. Hopefully all street types benefit equally so the PCI can be raised up. As we laid out the CIP for that 5-year spending plan, we see the PCI going from the low 60s into the mid to high 60s. We worked very closely to traffic and safety to run several different models and several different spending scenarios, which we'll bring to you in detail. But we could lay out how much money it would take us over a 5-year period, over a 10-year period to get into a PCI of 70 or a PCI of 75. So those are good things to know so that we can think about how much we want to invest in our streets going forward. So I don't have all of those numbers for you tonight. We don't need to act on those, but that's the sort of effort that traffic and safety spent the last 1.5 years working on along with staff. And that's what we'll bring you in the next few months. We mentioned the Albany Hill Access Improvements Project earlier. This Saturday we had the tree removal service out there taking down 8 to 10 eucalyptus trees. They put in the path, they put in the center line of the path, they staked it out today. So we'll be moving forward very quickly. They have an aggressive schedule. They want to get as much of this work done before the rainy season begins. So we expect that the concrete work for the ADA path will be substantially complete before the rainy season comes, and then they'll be working in and out as weather allows on the other elements. So it's going to look great. It'll be a nice addition to the city, and this is one of those projects that was funded by Measure R and is coming out of the open space element of Measure R. So I'm back to sanitary sewers. Yeah, see? So the 2020 sanitary sewer rehab is split into 3 different parts. The one that you acted on earlier today on consent will be performed by Ranger, of 4,400 feet of sewer rehabilitation. Some of that work is going to be on Washington Avenue. We already talked about Washington Avenue being paved. Ranger is prepared to do this work ahead of time, so there won't be any conflicts. The other part of the work that I'll show in the next slide is off of this area here. This primarily is the work that Ranger has been doing for us and will continue to do for us. 6 and 8 inch pipe bursting on residential streets. This deserves to be highlighted because it's a little bit different than what we've seen before. This is the Buchanan sewer or interceptor that feeds directly into East Bay Mud's interceptor at the bay. So Albany has 2 connections, one near the El Cerrito border and one near the Berkeley border. So the area that we're looking at crosses UC property. It crosses Ocean View School property, Ocean View Park, and USDA. So that whole corridor there needs to be replaced primarily by pipe bursting. There's another section in there that will be a specialized cast-in-place pipe treatment. And then up above that will be pipe bursting and open cut elements on Marin. So 3,300 feet of pipe from essentially Evelyn all the way up to Curtis. So that'll substantially replace all of the sewer pipe that we haven't touched yet on Marin. So that's a big effort for us to go ahead and do that. And it's one that we invest in now, and then now we'll have the opportunity to invest in the street after that, and it'll be in place and done.
Could I ask about the Marin section of that? Isn't there a creek running under parts of Marin?
There is, and the more you can tell me about that, the easier it'll be for us. We've already run into it once. I believe we were up at the beginning part of this year in January and February, where we had a piece of pipe that we were replacing in a manhole in Marin, and we found that we could not perform the work until probably closer to April or May, when things had dried out underneath Marin. So for the most part, we can perform this work and it doesn't stop us, but that creek does sometimes have substantial flow in it. We need to watch that.
Okay. And am I getting this correct, that the Buchanan Street section is actually going under UC property and Ocean View School and Ocean View Park, not under the street?
That's correct. So we do have sewers in the street, but that's not part of this program here. If you look carefully at your aerials, you'll see that there's some manholes on the Gill Tract in Jackson and crossing those properties. So at the USDA facility, there's about 3 or 4 manholes that if you look carefully, you can spot them on aerials. So that runs directly, essentially in front of the USDA building, across the playfields, crosses Jackson, and then goes into the Gill Tract.
And the part going across, I asked this because my wife's involved with this one, the parts going across Ocean View schools are well known to the groups that are working to redo that school.
Yes, we have been coordinating with the design team on that, and we do owe them a little bit more information, but they have a good handle on where it is.
Okay, thanks.
And it's worth talking about, because that means we'll be working with 5 different property owners to coordinate activities and our construction activities as well as ongoing work on the properties. So we'll be hoping to work with USDA to do a little bit of staging on their property. They have a big lawn area, and kind of some of their areas are kind of tucked away next to their fence line. So we're hoping to work with them closely, and we'll work with all of the property owners to make sure we manage our construction around their activities. The cycle track extension and the Marin Buchanan Phase 4. So the Marin Buchanan Phase 3 was completed as part of the undergrounding project. As part of that, we want to collect some additional data. We know that the westbound traffic on Marin that activity, that dynamic changed a lot after we put in the improvements. So collecting that data will help us. The reality is that this project was placed in the CIP without funding. So staff needs to look for funding, and staff needs to essentially monitor this corridor more carefully to make sure we understand we want to apply the correct improvement. So it could be a cycle track. Depending on where the placement is, it could be a little bit different, but the intersection with Marin and San Pablo, we need to make sure we're looking at not just bike movements, but car movements as well, so we understand the best treatment there.
So is this the cycle track that goes from Marin Buchanan to the existing cycle track at routes, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, so on the diagram here, the blue part is in place. So that was done as part of the development. And the green part is the one that is essentially planned now that would go in front of essentially to replace the sidewalk or encroach into the sidewalk at the Gill Tract.
So as you're gathering your data, are you looking at how many bicycles actually use the part that is in existence? I mean, it's been 2 years now. There should be some data on that.
So I didn't pull that data. I can work with our community development staff to see if that data is available, and we can report on that.
I mean, it seems like it's a $721,000 project. It seems we want to know how much it's being used at one end before we spend that kind of money to put something in at the other end.
Yeah,
Might be a better use of those funds.
That's absolutely fair. I totally agree with that. The $721,000 was placed in the CIP 2 years ago, so I did not change that number. I didn't try to refine it. So before we get to a design, we'll absolutely look at that again.
Thank you.
Complete Streets, San Pablo and Buchanan. The design for this project is complete. We've gone back and forth with Caltrans a couple different times. We need to put that in front of Caltrans one more time to make sure that we satisfy all of their criteria. We've been scaling back some of the elements on this project. So for example, at the very beginning we had raised curbs, raised medians, so we've taken those out. So we are more and more in line with Caltrans design standards. So we don't see that as a big obstacle for getting in front of Caltrans for the pedestrian improvements for this project. Again, we'll be looking for funding for the construction elements. This may be something that, as we get funding, we put elements in place, but we'd really, if we can find it, we'd rather have this as one project if possible. Cordonices Creek Phase 4. Final design will be presented to council this fall. So that's done, and staff is just preparing that for council presentation. The project is pending funding. There is a gap in funding for that project. Council had approved a certain dollar amount, I think, 2 years ago, and we are almost twice that amount for the design that was put in front of us by the consultant. So it's either going to be staff looking for additional funding or finding ways to be very creative about reducing the scope of the project. So that's a preview of what you're going to see on staff presentation. Street lighting evaluation project. So the scope of the work here, as described in the CIP, is that we're going to get a baseline lighting assessment. So what we have in place now. We want to ask the consultant to establish lighting criteria for both commercial and residential areas. And then we're going to just find out where our lighting deficiencies are. So all of that work is essentially kind of a planning effort to get to a point where we know what the project is going to cost us. We want to go right into an implementation phase, but we also know that this is a strategic effort that needs to be done by the city. I think what's going to happen after this evaluation effort is we're going to find areas that are more critical to attack right away, so that we spend the dollars that we have as strategically as we can. After that evaluation, we'll know better how to recommend how much and how soon to get some lighting improvements in place for the city.
Robert, it's my understanding that the county maintains the street lights now. Is that correct? I mean, so you have to interact with the county at some point.
So the county maintains the street lights as well as street signals through a contract. So we own them, and they're essentially a service provider. So we do interact with them on a whole host of issues. So we would interact with them on the results of this project.
So, but we get to do what we want because
Our facilities, they'll maintain whatever we build.
Okay.
So we're hoping to get this off the ground in the second half of this fiscal year so that we can come to you with some, at least some preliminary results, hopefully. Further along than that, but at least some preliminary results in the springtime. And then we can start making some thoughtful decisions about how to invest for new lighting.
So can you go back to that for just a minute? Is it possible to put another bullet point after the design phase for implementation? Because it seems like it just keeps getting further and further away. And I think it's a safety issue. I think it's something we all agree that we want to get done sooner rather than later. If we're only really looking through the design phase, I mean, that's fine, but we need to get it done. So how do we get the action part moved up?
So the action part will fall in line immediately after design, but I can't ask you to fund a project where I can't tell you how much it costs. That's the only reason, that's the only hesitation that I have in putting a little bar at the end of the design phase, that's all.
Could it say pending funding, like design
Absolutely.
says?
Yeah, we can do that.
Personally, I think we don't want to lose track of this. We don't want it to kind of get spun out for too long.
Right, yeah, we don't want to lose this. If we gain momentum on this, I'm more than happy to spend more of the city's money on implementing and putting in safety lights, absolutely. Peggy Thompson Park playfield analysis. So I will admit that I found the most flattering photograph of our Peggy Thompson Park. So immediately or sooner, we'll be performing a cost analysis for the playfield improvements. We have an architect that we're working with. We have an architect that we're talking to about getting the cost analysis done as soon as we can. We're hoping to present results in the early part of the year, hopefully in January.
And I have to thank you for that, since this is one of the projects I've had particular interest, particularly since I recently discovered that I think it's Prop 68 that may have funds to actually do this once we know what it's going to cost. So this may become a reality sooner than a lot of us thought might be possible. But we do need that initial analysis. So.
Yes. Kames Adams Bike Boulevard. So the first task for Public Works is to develop a cost estimate for the pilot. So from the planning phase, I think it was last month, that Community Development put together a staff report and a project cost estimate. So I'm going to take that. I need to add on top of that CM cost and inspection cost and figure out how much it'll take to implement, and then also at the end of the project to demob it if necessary. So we want to get this done, but it will also, I want to make sure I'm clear about this. It wasn't included in the prior CIP, so when we bring it to you for action, we need to identify a funding strategy for the project. So that includes that includes all phases of the pilot, getting it off the ground, evaluating it, and demobbing it. One of the first elements of the pilot is data collection. So we'll be working with community development on just how much data, what kind of data, and how long it'll take to pull that data together so that we know kind of a baseline. I think you guys talked about this a month ago, what the baseline condition is so that we can measure improvement at the end of the pilot. And this is a prioritized list of CIP projects. So what we did is we tried to take all of the active or planned work that is ongoing now or that is planned for the near future, and lay it out for you to show just what work we're doing now based on the CIP we approved 2 years ago, and how we're moving forward. So if you just look at what we're doing right now in the fall of 2019, you can see that we've got safety improvement projects, we have a regulatory requirement project, we have cost-benefit projects such as streets and paving, and then we've got community enhancements below that. So there are projects that we need to do, so we put those on there to show that, you know, the safety projects are the ones that we try to push through as quickly as we can. And then the ones at the very bottom have a priority of 4, and those are community enhancements. Those are the ones that everybody wants, and we try to deliver those as best we can. But this was put in place 2 years ago, and so this was kind of the game plan we established 2 years ago. And as we're inviting 100% feedback now to see if we want to move any of these either forward or back in the priority list. So I think that's my presentation.
Okay. Do we have questions from council? Councilmember Barnes?
Actually, before we get into it, can I have two quick things?
Sure.
First, I'd like to recognize a new staff member. We have Devora Zadar, who's our new management analyst, and she's about a month into her employment here, and was able to step in and really help Robert. And we hope this will be. We're very excited that this position was approved in this year's budget, and it has made a big difference, and will make a big difference going forward.
Welcome aboard.
The second item that's Robert provided a lot of good information, but one thing that doesn't come across necessarily in the spend chart, we spent a tremendous amount of time over the last 2 years to get some programs up and running. This would be the sewer program, the sidewalk program, and most importantly the pavement program. We spent a lot of time, staff time, that's not reflected in dollars spent, but it's putting the pieces in place to get a consistent spend year over year. And so I just want to make that point that that was a lot of staff time that wasn't reflected in the spend, and so hopefully going forward that will pay dividends in increased spend going forward.
Thank you. Okay, questions? No. Thank you. Councilmember Moss?
Well, you actually answered a number of the questions I had. It was a very, very complete presentation. One thing I'm curious about, though, something that has not come before us, but that I brought up on, I think, the last mention of the JPA meeting about the fields in Berkeley that we're part of. There may well be a capital project down there that we're going to be asked to participate in. I'm wondering, is that something that we would put on our capital project list here, or is that funding would come in from another direction?
We'd have to look at, and I will be inviting City of Berkeley staff to provide a presentation to the council. And in terms of the cost magnitude, once we finally have more tangible numbers on what the project will entail for each jurisdiction participating, it may come out of some reserve funding as opposed to a direct city project, since we're contributing to a larger pool for a project that's a regional benefit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Somewhere in the report I noticed, a couple of capital projects that are in there, and I don't know if there's going to be a further presentation, but on our list, just one's a comment. I noticed our police fleet will be needed to have some vehicles added to it. It's been said before up here, but I would love to see at some point if we could electrify some of these vehicles coming forward. We're going to be talking about it at the end of our meeting here, but when I see that we're going to be buying some nice big Ford Cruisers and those probably are around for at least 10 years or more. It's, another 10 years before we could start to think about, well, why don't we get something that's electric? That's as much as a comment, editorial comment as anything. And then also on the list, which you didn't mention, but putting charging stations, getting that project up and running. A small question, but if we do finally get some charging stations in city property here in the parking lot at the City Hall or at the Public Works Building or at the library, will those be spaces that only electric vehicles can park in? Is that a...
Yes, thank you. So it's on my to-do list under community enhancement, so I haven't forgotten about it, I just didn't talk about it. So to answer your question about parking at City Hall, there are specific state regulations about what you need to put in place for an EV charging station, and the first EV charging station takes up the most space because it needs to be ADA compliant, which means there's a little corner over here which is painted and striped for no parking between the EOC and PD. So we need to kind of take over that particular corner and scoot over some parking slots on that lane. I don't want to say that parking will be lost, but if you're not driving an EV car, you may not be able to park in that slot like you used to. So there is going to be some trade-offs, absolutely.
Okay. All right, that's it for me at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor McQuaid, do you have any questions?
I do. I actually have a lot of questions, many of which you've already answered. Thank you. That was a great presentation. And I would echo what Councilmember Moss said about electrifying our fleet as we can. There certainly are national electrification municipal programs that I've sent you information. I'm sure that you're looking into that. Just thinking about out here, the complete streets, San Pablo and Buchanan. I'm sorry, I got a little bit lost, I think, on that. It's not on the schedule, but it's in the CIP. Is that correct? So what is?
So the complete streets, San Pablo, Buchanan, is the design phase is complete.
Okay.
So as we seek out, if we identify additional funding, that'll be ready to go into construction. So the only really element that we have left is communicating back and forth with Caltrans to make sure that all of their questions are answered.
And as far as the Buchanan Marine Utility undergrounding, do we have a realistic idea when that'll be done? And no is an okay answer.
I could, I guess, attempt to address that. So we've tried to get a decent schedule out of AT&T, and we get vague schedules of by the end of the year or early next year.
Okay.
We're trying to get more. The steps that are left would be them, AT&T completing their undergrounding, then they're going to take out the poles. Then we have 3 light poles to put, street lights to put back in. And we've also reserved a small amount of money to clean up whatever AT&T doesn't necessarily fix. So they're going to pull out. So where there are poles right now, we left real thin flags of concrete, so we can pull those out, and we'll need to pour probably more substantial sidewalk concrete. So my hope, early part of next year.
Okay. As far as Ocean View improvements, it mentions bocce ball. It doesn't mention pickleball. Are we ready to think really seriously about pickleball?
So I think we are thinking seriously about it. I think one of the things we were talking about is it a CIP project or something that could be handled as a maintenance project, since it's fundamentally just restriping the courts, so it may not rise to that level.
Okay, thank you. And looking at traffic sign replacement, as we do that, can we be sure that every intersection has at least one sign with the street name on it? There are some that still don't have any.
Yeah, so we have a contract, and Razoo is managing that right now. They're going, and he's going through One of the things that's taking so long is going through each of the streets that doesn't have a sign and make sure the street signs are right, because the initial one had things pointing the wrong direction. So the idea is that we're going to replace all the get out the reflective stop signs or traffic signs, but then also go replace the missing street signs.
Great, thank you. The rapid flashing beacons, why can't those just get done?
So my understanding, they were presented to traffic and safety this last round, and so I think, okay, we got the thumbs up, so we will go and implement those. I think they're fairly straightforward. And I think one of the big hurdles was they'd no longer require a variance or something from Caltrans. So I think this will be a much quicker implementation.
So will these be on Marin, on San Pablo? The ones like Marin and Talbot, we talked about when I was on traffic and safety, which is a long time ago. And then there's the one on Buchanan and Taylor.
This was discussed at Traffic and Safety a few weeks ago. My memory is already fading a little bit about exactly which locations the commission settled in, but that would be an action that would come to City Council. We took it to the commission because it had been a number of years since there had been any public dialogue about that, and we had some school safety assessments that were prepared, and we also got some community feedback about other locations that would benefit from the beacons. So we felt we should take one more look at it before we brought it to you, and when we'll work with, oops, sorry, mess your stuff up here, Robert, to bring it back to you when they're ready to execute on the project.
Do you know when that'll be?
Not exactly.
Okay. And my last one is about the police cycle shed. Where are we on that?
I think that is more of a back burner item, and I think that's driven by the police department. It's not necessarily the same priority as it was in the past.
Thank you. Oh, and I do. There's 3 things that aren't listed anywhere that I think should be. Can I mention those now, or should I wait for the comment? Michelle, what do you want? Sorry.
Go ahead and ask them. That's...
The improvements to the Memorial Park dog park, that we sort of approved doing something?
Right. I think we need to get in the details of that and then scope it out and put it into the CIP formally.
And accessible and automatic doors on all city facilities. We've gotten some money to do that, but we'll need more money.
Right. So this was a new issue, and I wanted to maybe talk with you to get a better understanding of what you were planning on that, or your thoughts were on that issue.
And then the last one is developing a new active transportation plan. Does that come under the CIP, or is that a totally separate thing?
So we've funded it under the CIP before. I think at this point, staff is looking for and applying for grant funding for a new ATP. So if that comes through, it can be a line item either in the operating budget or the CIP, depending on the dollar amount. But that'll be the progress. Is if we get outside funding, that can be moved forward immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Pilch.
I just want to discuss the, could we go to the budget versus actuals or budget versus spend slide? I want to understand this a little bit more. So we budgeted for these years, we budgeted these amounts, and we only spent less than half or a little bit more than half. So does that mean those funds are sitting in some account somewhere, and that money has actually been moved to the account, ready to be spent, but we haven't been able to spend it yet? That's one question.
Yes. So the large majority of the variance there is related to sewer projects and paving projects, and so those are big ticket values. And so the sewer money is sitting in the sewer funds. The paving money is sitting in the various paving funds, ones that are local, and then ones that are passed through, and so forth. So it's a combination.
Is that the vast majority of the remaining funds is sewer and paving?
I think the variance in the first year was largely sewer and paving, and that probably extends into the second year as well. Yeah,
Okay.
it probably extends through.
And then I want to ask you to repeat your statement about the time you spent getting to a place where you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but have a more consistent spend, or can you restate that again for me?
Yeah, so the idea is, and we're getting very close to this on the sewer projects, where in year one you're designing a project and you're constructing the project you designed the year before. So you're always designing and constructing at the same time. So you're not projects just roll out at more of a consistent pace. And so the benefit of this is if you run into, let's say, like we've done this on the sewer projects and a number of times, you run into a section of street that has a problem. That's not going to hold up your whole thing. You just pull that out of the project and you go along with the rest of it because you know you can pick it up in the next year. So that's what we want to get to with all of our programmatic type projects.
Yeah, that does sound good. And so does that mean that you're heading towards making those two bars equal eventually, or will the blue bar always be a little bit ahead of the orange or peach or salmon bar?
Our best efforts would be to have them line up, but my sense is we'll always be a little behind.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any public comment on this? I don't think, since it's a presentation, I don't think we have to take public comment, but if people have questions, I'd like to. Sure, Mr. McLeod, come on up.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
On the rectangular rapid pedestrian beacons, I'm looking at the project detail for the project that's in your binder, and the two locations that were identified by the commission were Marin and Talbot and San Pablo and Castro.
Good evening, Ian McLeod. Just a quick comment, and it's mostly to do with the JPA, the Tom Bates Field Complex. I just wanted to stress how important that is to our kids. I was coaching soccer for about 10 years, and we were over there all the time. Really essential for Albany kids, and it's really essential that the city of Albany participate in the continued funding of that. Otherwise, Albany kids could conceivably be blocked out from that facility. There are teams, clubs in Berkeley that want Berkeley fields for Berkeley kids. So if we're not paying into it, we may not have access to it. So it's really important to plan for that and participate in all that continued funding. So to get that into the budget and into the ongoing calculations for what we'll need to spend is really important. So it's a really great facility. We're really lucky to have it, and it really does serve the whole east side of the bay over here. But it's sort of a pay-to-play system. It's kind of how it was set up. So other cities are excluded. Oakland kids can't play there, et cetera, et cetera. So let's continue our engagement in that. And the Fieldhouse project, I think, is really necessary there to provide safe bathrooms and a meeting space for teams and clubs. The current situation with bathrooms there is really bad. Just 3 porta potties that are not in good shape and really unpleasant for everybody. So I would really encourage Albany to stay involved with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to council. Does anybody have comments other than the questions that have already been asked?
Well, I just wanted to ask exactly what sort of comments or direction staff is looking for at this point, how detailed or, what sort of direction you want to hear about?
Well, for us, I think for the most part on the project level, we understand through working with the other departments, scope, schedule, and budget. And so we're executing, as we showed on that last slide with the schedule, those are the projects we're executing. The feedback we're getting now is new projects are also being added to our plate, such as Keynes Adams. So we're trying to move everything forward as quickly as possible. We just want to make sure that we're telling you we're doing one thing, and if there's something that is off, or you want some sort of redirection in terms of the number or the projects that are highest on our priority list, we're just looking for feedback in that direction. That's all.
Okay. Well, as long as you mentioned Keynes Adams, yeah, that was it's a new one, and it's unfunded. Could that be? What is the possibility of finding grant money for a project like that? Any ideas at this point, or wild guesses?
We haven't seen anything that jumps out at us as a good fit for that, a grant that would be a good fit for that. But as these grant opportunities roll out, we always go through the description of the grant program and side by side with the CIP and try to match it up. So we'll certainly look for that, but I don't know that we've found anything quite yet that would work for that one.
Thank you very much. So I guess my one comment would be then, we have some momentum going with this project now. I would like to see it be formalized somehow as part of the CIP. That's it.
Okay, well, I think I'm the last to speak, and everything that my concerns have been addressed with one exception, and that is the issue of our paving. Really does concern me. Our PCI is not in the low 60s. It's in the last report. It dropped from 58 to 57. So we have among the worst pavement in Alameda County. I think only Oakland, I think San Leandro and Berkeley are comparable. Only Oakland is really worse, and Oakland has these vast stretches of roadway. So it's really, and we have a commitment to the Alameda County Transportation Commission to maintain a PCI score of 60. And there is no threat to revoke our funding, but technically we're out of compliance. And it's at least to my mind, it's a very real thing. It's probably costing people who live here quite a bit of money in terms of auto repair and maintenance. And there's a safety aspect to it. And there's kind of a fiscal responsibility aspect to it, because I don't think I need to tell you, but as roads deteriorate and need more work, it's like not changing the oil in your car. It's not a good investment. And then there is a kind of a big picture financial aspect, which is, and I've said this before, not paving your roads is really a form of borrowing. We're shoving off to the future our own obligations as a community and saying, well, let the next generation fix the roads. So when I looked at the CIP and I looked at the road rehabilitation, and it's in capital letters, no more funding is recommended, and beyond what is here. And I look at it and I say, well, like for 2020, it's 1.2 million for road rehabilitation, 29.5 miles of paving that we maintain. And then I look at like that little stretch of bike path between Sprouts and the corner at 725,000. It seems out of whack. It does seem to me like maybe we should be thinking about spending more on paving. And I also wanted to mention one thing I noticed when in the compliance review at ACTC, most of the jurisdictions that there's a requirement under Measure BB that local street and road funding, that a certain percentage be devoted to bike routes. And most of these cities had in the range of 35, I think they're 35%. The minimum is 15%, I think. Most were in the range of 30% or so. I think Alameda was kind of an outlier at 50%, but Albany was over 90%. And, you know, we have to balance the different needs. And I do want to be very supportive of efforts to get grant funding for bike facilities, but I think we also need to get, we're below the minimum standard on our paving. And I liked what you said about looking more closely at the PCI and having some sense of at a particular rate of expenditure, when do we reach 60? And then we're past the minimum. And then how much more would we need to spend at what rate to get to, say, 70, which I think would be a really nice place to be as a community if we want to have reasonably decent roadways. So I just wanted to make that comment. I have a procedural question. This is not on PCI, but you know, update can be a little bit ambiguous. Right. There are updates that are passive. You know, you update me, and then there's updating that's active. We update the plan. When do we formally update? When is the next formal update of the CIP?
Right, so the next formal update of the CIP will be in the springtime, and it'll be more in alignment with when we go with the operating budget. So that'll be a refresh, and that's actually the best opportunity for us to bring in either new projects or new funding requests. So
okay, and that's when we would talk about rebalancing what we're doing here.
Right.
Okay, thank you. One small question. It seemed to me that when we approved our sidewalk policy, we had a repair on sale requirement. Has that been implemented? Where does that stand?
The implementation is moving slowly. We are working with the real estate community on the execution of that. So it is being executed on construction projects, but not on point of sale at this time.
I see, okay.
It is something that we're actively working on.
I think it's something we ought to do. We've got a lot of sales going on, and we've got a lot of potential there to get some fixes. Okay, that's all that I have. So you want to finish it up, Robert?
Do you have anything to add, Mark?
I think we're done.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. This is really impressive. It is an amazing amount of work. It's wonderful to have this new position and new face in the room. We really look forward to having more of a plan, and you know, not just all of us jumping on this or that project, even though we all have ones that we particularly love. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's go to our next item. We do not have any public hearings tonight, so we go to our unfinished business, the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan draft. And this is an item that we started as a workshop, and we needed more time, so we're continuing it tonight.
Good evening. This is a continuation of your September 16th study session. We're requesting your feedback on the draft climate action and adaptation plan that has been developed over the last year or so. In 2010, the City Council adopted Albany's first climate action plan, which outlined a course of action for the city to reduce emissions 25% by 2020. And the city has successfully decreased community-wide emissions by 33%, exceeding that goal. Over the past year, staff has worked closely with consultants to develop a new climate action and adaptation plan for long-term reduction targets. The draft before you tonight was developed based on input from the Climate Action Committee as well as the community. And we're asking you to provide feedback on the draft, including setting greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets for 2035 and 2050. Those currently exist, but we're asking if you'd like to keep them as is. Ryan Garner of Rincon Consulting is here tonight to answer any technical questions that may come up, and we're looking forward to your questions and feedback on the draft.
So we'll start then with council questions. Does anyone have questions on the draft? Boy, it's a lot of it's a lot of material. Councilmember Pilch.
Well, I'm just finding myself. I wrote all these notes down last time. Quite a few notes after, and they were spurred by the presentation we had. But now we're just launching right into the comments. So I'm a little bit. It's going to take me a little while to get back on track, get my mind back on track of where we were and what actually we were discussing. So I don't know if there's a solution to that, if there's like an abbreviated presentation we can do, or...
why don't I kick off with a couple of questions, and then maybe that'll get people moving. Does that work? Okay. A question that comes up with, there's a lot of efforts in which Albany needs to play a role, and it needs to do its share, and I think we all want to do our share. Homelessness is one of those. Housing is another one. These corridors, like the San Pablo corridor, is another. And carbon, climate change is such an issue. It actually comes as a bit of a surprise to me that there isn't a standard yet at the state for the date by which we should achieve certain targets in order to do our bit for achievement of the state's commitments. Do you have a sense of why there is no such standard for us to follow, and tell us how you came to your recommendation of the standard that we adopt?
So the state, you're speaking about the state targets, and
I'm just saying in general why it's just a little bit surprising that there isn't a date by which every city is expected to achieve carbon neutrality.
Well, the state has its own standard. Ryan, are you familiar with anything related to requirements for cities put by the state in terms of targets?
Yeah, so the state has avoided, I think we were alluding to is the state hasn't come down and said, all right, every city, you have to meet this goal by this time. They've been kind of taking the roundabout approach, especially using like CEQA as a tool to kind of force cities to come along with the state targets. So the state targets are kind of through a roundabout way applied to cities. But the state has not, you're right, come down and said you have to have a climate action plan and you have to reach this goal. But in order to, say, streamline CEQA or kind of show consistency, get funding, those types of things, you have to be consistent with the state goals.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There must be a reason for it. I'm kind of in the same place of sort of where where do we begin? But it does seem as though that would be the first decision point, really, is what targets shall we set? And there is not guidance coming from the state, although there might be incentives for particular goals.
So the state has specific goals. Let me see if I can find them in here. Yeah. So this in terms of goals and targets. Right now, Albany's goals, as stated by the general plan, are what's stated in this plan. 60% reduction by 2035 and carbon neutrality by 2050. The Climate Action Committee has made a proposal the state of California has these goals, and then we've listed several cities around us that have different goals as well. I don't know if that's helpful for your discussion on targets.
It's not unhelpful, but it doesn't help all that much. It looks like Fremont is the one city that has set a carbon neutrality target of its own, consistent with the one that is set by the state of California for itself.
For context on these, Fremont has had the most recent council conversation about climate action because they've just launched their climate action planning process. And so that's why they've aligned with the state. My understanding is these other cities have probably not had recent council conversations about setting targets.
Okay, thank you.
So was that, that Fremont goal, was that in our previous packet? Because it was, okay, so, but it was a very recent thing.
Recent, yes.
Okay.
Have we gone to the public comment yet?
No, we're asking questions.
Oh, it's just questions for now. Okay, I don't have any more questions.
No more questions. Okay, how about you, Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Well, you've sort of answered one of them. The other, I have a lot of comments, most of which are kind of picky. So I'll ask my picky question. On page 18, Sutter East Bay Medical Center is called out in the wildfire section. I'm just kind of curious as to why that particular business was called out. It's a medical office. You know, there's a lot of other businesses along there. Why was Sutter particularly called out?
What page?
18.
It's I think it's 17 in the draft, is the one, the draft I have at least. But.
Right. I thought 17, but my thing now says 18, so it's somewhere there.
Oh, 17 or 18 under wildfires. This is it says that there are no emergency assets in the wildfire risk zones, but potential areas of concern would be Sutter East Bay Medical Care and Children's Center. They're at risk due to their proximity to Albany Hill. I can't say for sure why that was included. It was included in a previous draft of an adaptation plan that was done through Stop Waste funding. I think we should include the Orientation Center for the Blind in this if we're including, I imagine they included them because they're facilities, but we can
be more concerned.
Take that sentence out.
If a fire was raging down the hill, I'd be more concerned with the car dealerships and repair places and things that have highly flammable materials in great quantity. I would be much more concerned about those than the medical building.
Mm-hmm. So we can revise this. Would you like us to just take Sutter out, or we could also add in something about the types of businesses?
I'll leave that to your good judgment.
Okay.
I wouldn't be inclined to, the special concerns around children and visually impaired people are such that, to me, it's worth keeping the mention of those as institutions of special concern.
I would agree.
Other questions?
That's my only
Okay. Questions, or should we go to
not
public?
so much. I have comments, but...
Let's go to public comment then.
Yeah.
Let's. Do we have cards?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Beal?
So, in this war against carbon, in any war, you need to look at who your friends are, and our best friends are the trees. So looking around Albany, I see the eastern part of the city has lots of trees, but my part, the central part, we're noticing not so many trees. The trees are good because they produce oxygen. People breathe the oxygen, produce carbon dioxide, so it's a nice relationship. Plants are good for your emotional well-being. So I think I looked and I didn't see anything, but there should be something in this plan about maintaining our vegetation levels. Looking around, I see a lot of people have paved over their entire property, so there's all concrete. So I'd like to see going forward, the city do something to encourage residents to maintain the vegetation levels on the property. I don't know what that does mathematically to the carbon score, but it seems like it's a good thing for the overall well-being of the city. One of the things we do have in place is the street tree program. So this is really nice because the city will actually coordinate putting in a street tree and finding one that won't damage the sidewalks too much. And then I think having the trees in the street helps filter the air coming into your house. So I'd like to see something along those lines. I know we've got, another 20 years or so before we need to meet the target, but that would be a good way to put money into something now that would help out a lot. So thank you.
Excellent point. I think that's a resilience issue, a very important one. Other speakers?
Yeah, next Nick Peterson, and then Ian McLeod.
Good evening, City Council members. My name is Nick Peterson. I'm a member of the Albany Climate Action Coalition. I'm also on the Climate Action Committee, which advises you, but in this capacity, I'm here as a resident. And I want to encourage you to move quickly on this plan and adopt it. People talk about, yes, we've got 20 years to do it. Actually, we're behind. We're way, way, way behind. Climate scientists are telling us that we're needing to make radical change in less than 10 years, or we've really blown it and the situation is going to get worse. So one thing I want to point out is the plan is a plan. It doesn't have very specific implementation strategies associated with it. It makes some suggestions. All these suggestions are good, but how do you bring them off? They're going to take really difficult and complicated decisions. And one thing I would like to push the city to do is to get a full-time staff member that has the skills and training to focus 100% of their time on this, to really bring the disparate city and community and business groups together that are going to have to agree on what we do. It isn't one of these things, I mean, we did sort of the low-hanging fruit, and everyone says, well, we've made these targets. Some of us don't really know how we made the target. It might be just because of global climbing, the winters got warmer and we're burning less gas. But the science is very firm, and it's happening. You might say, well, Little Albany, if Little Albany goes carbon zero or not, who gives a crap? Does it really matter? Yes, it does matter, because we're the ones that really initiate all this. I was just reading an article, I think it was in the Times today, about how oil was first discovered and drilled for in Pennsylvania somewhere, and we created this whole mess in this country. We developed the technologies, we sold, made a lot of money off of it. And now I think it's up to our community and all American communities to come up with solutions, and that's what Albany's doing here. There are difficult solutions. They're going to take a lot of strong political will and organization and training and education of our populace. They're not going to happen quickly. Things like going all electric, switching to electric vehicles and active transportation. These are all things that we need to prioritize, because we have put them on the back burner for way too long, and now we have really no time. It isn't 20 years. We can't in 20 years go to zero. We have to start the plan now so that we can move in a way that people at least will begrudgingly go along with. If we pull fast ones later, we won't make it. So I encourage you to pass the plan and then to implement it very strongly with funding and appropriate personnel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Ian McLeod again. So many points to make about this great climate action plan. It's really encouraging to see it moving forward. I think electrification is a major goal. We absolutely have to stop burning fossil fuels. I mean, that's the bottom line. You cannot stop climate change unless you stop burning fossil fuels. That includes natural gas for houses, businesses, cooking, whatever. There are alternatives that work great for electric buildings. So I think that really needs to be pushed. Part of a corollary of that, which I don't see very much in the plan, is that there's not very much there about renewable resources, renewable energy, and I really think there should be much more of a push to put solar PV on every possible roof that we can as part of resilience, as part of reducing the load on the grid, as part of getting EB or the East Bay, whatever, electrical sources diversified and localized, and it will be part of a future microgrid where we can have local power supplied to local houses and businesses without drawing from other places. So that really needs to be addressed in this. And there's another part that really needs to be addressed, which is green building standards. We are woefully inadequate at the moment. There's almost like 0 standards at the moment in our building code, building and planning code. One example would be requiring passive house certification for multifamily buildings. It basically adds insulation, does air sealing, makes buildings more resilient, lowers the energy usage. It's all part of electrification. It reduces equipment cost, and it provides, much better places to shelter and heat events, smoke events. It provides filtered air. That's one example. I love the trees. When I was first moved into our block on Spokane, we had a block party. Tony Wolcott organized. With his help, we organized a tree planting weekend. We planted, like 15 trees on our block, and I haven't really seen that going on lately. I don't know why we can't get back to that. Paving is a big issue, but at the same time, it's got to be done in conjunction with active transportation and complete streets updates. There's no point in paving a street if we're going to come back later and redo it for a protected bike path. It's throwing money away, basically. So it's all got to be done in conjunction with the complete streets. And I think we need to be really explicit about bicycle improvements. It's got to be protected bike lanes. We're not going to increase our modal share of biking and other rolling modes of transportation unless we put protected bike lanes on all our major streets. So that's how we get there. We got a lot of work to do, but we can do it. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I ask you a question, Ian? Sure. Is that okay?
We didn't agendize this as a workshop, but let's go ahead and, since we started it as a workshop, I think we can.
Workshop last time. Yeah.
And we're an unfinished business. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
I just had a question about passive house certification. I know a tiny bit about it, but you mentioned multifamily. Is it only for multifamily, or could?
No, it can
generally
apply to
speaking,
any
could it be
type
for
of
anyone?
building. It can work for commercial buildings, but there's been REACH code research done on its applicability to multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
And it works very well for multifamilies.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Do we have other people waiting to speak? No? Okay, then we bring it back to council. Anyone want to kick this off?
Sure. And so my comments might be a little bit, what do they call that? Not train of thought, the opposite of train of thought. Anyway, stream of consciousness, thank you. But I did take notes from last time, and here they are, for better or for worse. I do agree that we need to move fast. Electrification should be a big part of this. There's just no question that that's the way to stop burning fossil fuels. Electrification of vehicles for transportation and electrification of buildings. And I'm glad the previous speaker mentioned REACH codes, because it might be in here. I can't remember if the REACH codes are explicitly called out, but if not, they should be. I think that we ought to commit to the same timeline that the state does and that Fremont has, and 2045 would be a better goal if that's what the state is going for. I spoke last time, I think, about putting the seismic retrofit ordinance in place sooner than later. We've already got given staff direction to develop that, so we need to move that one along. getting involved with EBCE with their local development plan on projects is going to be important. Green building standards, I think that goes to REACH codes. We do have a tree master plan called out in the document, so I agree with that we need to keep our city green and even greener for many different reasons, including climate mitigation, climate change mitigation. One of the things I'd like to see in the plan is, and since it has been a couple of weeks, forgive me if I'm talking about things that already are in there or not, but I'll say them anyway. A prioritization of actions so that we know, what's the biggest bang for the buck, and/or what's the most important things we need to do right now, and what sort of things can we leave till a little bit later on. That will be important. One thing about electric vehicles, as long as I have the bully pulpit here, is that they're here, they're real, they work great, and one thing that people should remember is the market for used electric vehicles is great for the buyer. They're less expensive than other vehicles, so you can get a great plug-in hybrid or a totally electric vehicle for a very good rate if it's even only a few years used. And then I guess finally there's one nit about the section of the CAP that includes a graph that claims that we have we've had no days over 90 degrees an hour historically. I think that data might be a little bit old, might be a little bit wrong, because we've just had this past year, I believe we had at least one day over 90 degrees. So someone, I'm not going to be able to reflect this correctly, but I can pass this along later. A member of the public recommended that we revise that part because it looked like the data about the current climate was not quite up to date. And I do think we need to act sooner than later. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Okay, I have some, I think, as Councilmember Pilt said, some sort of stream of consciousness thoughts, so try to bear with me. We need to be careful, and I think we need to call out a little more strongly ensuring that people of all abilities are included in this plan. And we probably need to call out specifically wheelchair users, walker users. I think that sometimes you just say all abilities, they kind of get skipped over. So we want to be sure that they're included in all of this. I think electrification, one of the things I really like about it is the earthquake safety piece, that if we're not concerned about your building exploding from fire, that certainly is going to be helpful. And while it'll take a long time to get there, I think that's another reasonable reason to do that. Again, we want to, as we're looking at electrification, be careful we don't exclude people in our community by putting in codes that are too restrictive. I think we need to make it easy for people to take their own steps and give them examples of things that they can do individually that do make a difference, or things they can do with their neighbors. Somebody mentioned from the public about solar. I think that needs to be called out a little bit more. I watched a little bit of the school board meeting the other night, and there was interest in Albany High School students in climate action and what they can do. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to maybe work with some high school students and get them involved in this plan and how they can work on implementing the plan and how we can work together with them. I think this is, we're working on engaging our youth, and this is, I think, an area where they have certainly proven that they're not only interested, but they're the leaders. There's a couple of language changes I'd like to see made. On page 3, it takes a village. We think, I'm just going to read the sentence. We thank you for choosing to live, work, or play in Albany. I think we should add study. Again, that kind of brings our student population into this. On page 5, how we'll get there. I think it's critical that we're advocating on both the state and the federal level. You know, Albany can do everything possible, and if we don't have the state and we don't have the federal government doing things, while we've accomplished a lot, we haven't accomplished what we need to accomplish globally. So I think that advocating for state and federal legislation needs to move up to short-term. Short-term, it needs to be a constant. What else? Okay, on page 7, there's a phrase that says, because if Albany doesn't do it, who will? To me, that sounds a little bit trite. I just don't particularly like that phrase. I think as Councilmember Pilch mentioned, we're planning to do some of the recommendations through the ATP, seismic retrofit, tree master plan. So it's good that they're in here, but I think we need to acknowledge that we are doing those things. And I think it should be consistent with the state goals. It doesn't make any sense to me to set goals that the state doesn't. You know, since the state now has higher goals, I think we need to align ourselves with the state goals. And that's it for now.
Thank you. Councilmember Moss?
Okay, thank you. It's amazing. I think this is the one issue that, to me, is the most important thing that we get to deal with while we're on council, and we'll be dealing with, and you know, what the remainder of the time on council, the next council after that, on into generations. So I've gone over this over and over again, and I've tried to condense down. I had a lot of ideas, but given the hour and the stage that we're at, I'm going to try to avoid getting into the weeds a little bit too much, although I do want to add a couple ideas at the end. First, I think we all need to thank the Climate Action Committee, all the other commissions and committees, the staff, the consultants, and all the public that participated in this process. It's true. I think most people in Albany get it, that climate action is real, and that the quick answer is stop using fossil fuels. And we need to do that as quickly as possible. There were a lot of great suggestions throughout it. I think at one point I was looking at the comments, and it was almost like we had crowdsourced ideas out there, and we just got a lot of great ideas, some of them on a kind of more micro scale and some on a larger scale, but a lot of good stuff in the comments beyond what the actual plan has. So I also appreciated that social equity issues were brought up and mentioned numerous times. I think Peggy mentioned this on some degrees of people of all abilities being able to participate in this, but it's also people of all economic abilities, and you know, using that as a factor as we go forward to judge what we decide to do, I think is pretty important. I was disturbed by some of the public comments to this plan, that not that we don't all get it, that it is an important thing, we have to deal with it, but when I was reading on some of the comments that people didn't want to give up their natural gas in their homes because they were foodies and they wouldn't be able to cook as well in the future, I was shooken up by that, to say the least. I think we have to get beyond that, way beyond that, frankly. This is something that's going to affect our planet. It's going to affect our, most of us, probably not so much, but our kids, our grandkids, their kids, their grandkids are all going to be dealing with this. And if we are inconvenienced by not being able to cook over a natural flame, so be it, is sort of my attitude. So I think one of my criticisms, and this is sort of a general criticism, and I haven't been able to put it specifically as to how you would change this, but when you look at that hazard risk summary on page 18 in the plan, it looks at very set things: wildfires, landslides, flooding, and the risks for 2100 are either moderate or low. 2100 is way off. None of us are going to be around. Actually, none of our kids will be around, and I'm not sure if anybody's grandchildren who were born will be around in 2100. I think that kind of puts off a lot of stuff so futuristic that I think can be a tendency for people that read that to say, well, that's not my problem, or I'm not, it kind of lessens the need to do something directly about that. So I would love that part talked about problems that we're likely to be encountering sooner. And as it's turning out, a lot of the science seems to be indicating that a lot of these things that were on a timeline of 2100 or 2050 are happening a lot sooner. In fact, I would say between when this plan process started and tonight, there have been a lot of updates that seem to indicate that we're going to have maybe more flooding than 72 inches at the shoreline, maybe extensively more, maybe more days over 90 degrees than what they were predicting. Now, I know we can't keep changing it every moment as the science goes ahead, but I think there'd be something to be said for actually getting more real about how bad things are likely to get, particularly if we don't start to act now. And there's a lot of things that weren't mentioned in that could have been mentioned. The threat to food supply, the health impacts. We talk about, well, if there's a fire, there might be some smoke. But, if there's many heat days, there'll be a lot of different things that'll go down. Recently, we talked about mosquito abatement was one of the subjects before council. Well, if you start raising the temperature here 4, 5, 6 degrees, we're going to have a lot more insect problems. So I think there'd be something to be said for actually scaring the population a little bit about what's coming down the pike. And perhaps there'd be less of a reaction that would say, well, I can't give up my gas stove because I like to cook. I mean, I just find that absurd. So I guess I would get into the weeds on two potential suggestions. One of them related to this whole social equity idea that, and it came up in a lot of the comments that, well, I can't electrify because I can't afford it, or I can't change out all these things in my house because, I'm poor and I don't have the money. Well, another thing that was also mentioned kind of indirectly was this idea that all of us, many of us up here are electrifying, are putting solar panels on, are getting plug-in hybrids or plug-in cars if we can afford them. But I would also say many of us up here travel. We fly to Europe, we fly to Asia, we take long vacations, and that's one part of this whole climate thing that we can't mandate requirements on people, but we could consider saying that if you live in Albany and you're going to take a trip, this is how much carbon you're going to be putting out in the atmosphere. If you're flying back and forth to Europe, that's what, 2.5 tons of carbon potentially. And given that number of $400 of what it would cost to mitigate that further down the line, we might start talking about having a way to contribute money, at first voluntarily, into something that could pay for those in our community that can't afford to electrify or go forward. I'd love to see discussions of ideas like that. And although that one is, just sort of popped in my brain, I don't know exactly what the complications of putting that together, but I think those are that's the kind of thinking we have to do going forward. One last addition I would love to put in here. There was a person in Albany who I think foresaw a lot of this, who passed away a few years ago, Catherine Sutton. I would love to see a comment about Catherine in here, because I think she was a bit of a prophet on a lot of these issues. And although she was, in her own style, was able to step on a lot of feet and wasn't always that easy to take, I think Catherine was actually pretty on point on a lot of the changes that we need to do. And it's a small thing, but I think she could be mentioned somewhere in this report, that going forward, we have to keep that spirit in mind.
Okay, I think it's down to me. I'll try to be quick. I think it is crucial to keep in mind that cities cannot solve this, but we have to do our share. We have to do what we can. I think I hear a consensus emerging to align Albany's goals with those of the state of California, and I'm in for that most definitely. I'm glad you mentioned travel, because I get a constant stream of Facebook posts and emails, and at Christmas you get all these emails with people showing their pictures of all the places they traveled, and they're very highly educated and progressive young people, but they're going to do what they're going to do, and I'd rather see a carbon tax and let people choose whether they're foodies who want their natural gas stove, or they are travelers, that they make their own trade-offs in accordance with their preferences, but that they have an economically grounded payment that's affected by that. Here in Albany, I think one way that is expressed, and it's a problem that came up when we talked about rent review, which is that the landlord provides the appliances and the insulation, but the tenant pays the utility bills. And we should try to think creatively about ways to get around that, so that the incentives exist for landlords to make those investments and reap benefits from the savings. Our city, I think that one of the things, keeping in mind that this is, in a very real sense, more of a communicative act than anything else. Adopting a climate action plan is reflecting our willingness to do our share. I think we should be looking at where Albany can do the most, and where it makes, what's the best fit for Albany to do something that could set a model for other places. And to me, one that seems very natural is that there's really no reason that any child who is not, doesn't suffer from any disability needs to be driven to school or drive to school. Everyone in a city this size can walk or ride a bike, as long as, if they're able to do that, as long as they can do it safely. And it's our responsibility as a city, I think, to try to make it safe for kids to do that, but also to work with the school district. I think that some of the cultural change and education needs to come, and organizing needs to come from the school district, and it may be that we have to take on partnerships more deeply with the school district than has been our custom to do to make that happen. But to me, that would be a great goal for Albany, to show what can be achieved in the area of getting kids walking and riding to school. So those are my, one other thing, and this was something raised by Vice Mayor McQuaid, and that is supporting more legislation at the higher level. You know, I think it's a little bit of a handicap to us that we are as dependent as we are on the California League of Cities for policy advice. Not that they do a bad job, but that they tend to promote only those things that are essentially matters of consensus among cities, and they tend to very strongly emphasize local control. And those are good, those are not necessarily bad things, but it's a very narrow perspective. Given who we are in Albany, I think that there might be more progressive sources of advice about what we should be supporting as a city at the state and higher levels. So those are my comments. Anybody want to close? No? Okay. Let's make this happen. Did you get all our?
Yes, thank you very much for the feedback.
Okay, thank you for all your hard work on this, and thank you. I want to echo the thanks to the consultants, to the and especially to the citizens that and the committee and the climate action group, all the people who got involved in this. Thank you very much. And we are ready to move to our closing matters. We have no new business, so we have future agenda items. Does anyone have a future agenda item they'd like to mention? No? Okay. I would like to mention, simply to put it out there, that a couple of cities in California have actually banned the sale of cigarettes. It may be more further than we're ready to go, but I think it's something that we should take a look at when we come back to strategic planning. I'm not asking that it be made an agenda item now, but I do want it to be talked about when we come back to our strategic plan. Okay, announcement of city meetings and events. We already mentioned the pancake breakfast and the hazardous waste drop-off event, and there are others listed here. Does anybody want to say anything about any of those? No? Okay, then we are ready to adjourn. Thank you.
Yeah.